What is GDPR? And more importantly, how does it impact you and your company? Join internationally known data privacy, data protection expert Jonathan Armstrong and Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, to learn more about the burgeoning world of data privacy and data protection. After listening to this episode, you'll walk away with a greater understanding of what this means for you and your organization. Life with GDPR is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
In this episode, I have a special guest, Jed Gardner. He is with Linedata Technology, and we take a look at the data transfer issues raised in the Schrems III decision invalidating Privacy Shield. I think you will find it extraordinarily interesting and very useful. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and today I have with me Jed Gardner. Jed is the Senior Vice President at Linedata Technology Services. He was on the podcast, or a podcast, earlier this year, and we had a pretty big development in July around data privacy. And so I've been exploring this issue in its all various ways, shapes, and forms. So I asked Jed if he would come back, and he's taking some time to visit with me today. So Jed, with that incredibly long-winded introduction, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for coming back to visit with me today.
Thanks for having me again, Tom. Great to be here.
So US, EU, UK, data privacy is always on the mind of your clients and my listeners. We had a case that I've called Schrems III. Others have called it Schrems II. Others have called it the death of Privacy Shield. Whatever it was a huge shockwave in the data privacy arena. So I was wondering if maybe you could just start with a little background as to EU, US data privacy, why the views are so divergent, and why it's important to every, not only corporate compliance officer, but every corporation now.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, and coming from my point of view as well, I'm a British citizen who lives in the US, and so obviously I've had quite mixed feelings over some of this, and the history really is that the EU has since it was developed, and since especially data privacy in the form of soft data has become prevalent. And when you're thinking about it purely just from the point of view of individuals, families, just from that point of view, it's really important to individuals, especially in the EU, and something that was seen very, very positive when the EU started to address it for individuals. And in particular, I think the understanding that the EU and the US, in particular the UK especially, and the US tend to have similar layouts of businesses where businesses are functioning across the Transatlantic, and so that was really where this concept came from, and it started out as something actually called Safe Harbor around the year 2000, which was originally the agreement signed between the EU and the US that the EU had recognized with the development of the internet and the transfer of digital data across the Transatlantic, that the Data Protection Directive from the EU didn't quite match up to US data privacy laws. And that purely really came down to the fact that the US has never really, from a federal point of view, been entirely clear about what data privacy laws really look like. There is some rough guidance, but really it's kind of down to the states to define that. And for the EU, where you've got a 28 country member state, effectively, that sign up to what was called really a directive when the Data Protection Directive was created, which is in the EU, for those that don't know, there's directives and there's regulations. And directives are where the EU will do something similar to what the US does, where they'll say, here's a broad framework of what we expect. You can now implement it in the way that you want to, but these are the guidelines that you need to follow the European directive. And then you have the regulations, which is we now are going to tell you exactly how you have to follow this, and you can't deviate from the plan. So the Data Protection Directive was just a directive, but it was much harsher and seen as a lot more protective than the US data privacy laws at the time. So there was this agreement that was made in 2000. In 2012, the EU decided that actually it would prefer to take data privacy into a regulation rather than a directive, and so came up with GDPR, which is now the EU regulation of data privacy. That applies to all 28 member states at the end of this year when the UK leaves the EU through Brexit. It will apply to 27 member states, but the UK is planning to take GDPR as its basis for data privacy moving forward. But this was negotiated between the 28 member states from 2012 and actually only really came into effect in 2018. But during that period, it was felt in the EU that the safe harbor agreement wasn't strong enough. And this really comes from a point of view of US surveillance and the way that it's carried out and the rules that apply to it. Then you have the 2013 situation where the NSA surveillance programs and data were released under an unauthorized activity, and the EU, it really put some doubt into the minds of the EU around how data was really being protected and what level of surveillance was being carried out and how that surveillance was being applied to EU citizens. So with that in mind, the EU-US Data Privacy Shield was put in place in 2016 and the Safe Harbor Agreement was deprecated in 2015. And the idea behind that was that knowing what GDPR was going to look like, the EU wanted the US to sign up to a much tighter data privacy rule set, and it's important to note that this was a voluntary agreement, so businesses could sign up to the Data Privacy Shield in order to get a much more guided way of applying data privacy across the Transatlantic. And basically what happened up until the deprecation of the EU-US Data Privacy Shield in July was that 5,300 SMEs and some large businesses had signed up in the USA voluntarily to follow the scheme to make sure that they could process and transfer data, EU data, into the US to be able to use it. And obviously, in July, the decision was made, and as you said, Schrems II, Schrems III. Either way, it's another Schrems impact to data privacy that has kind of come out of Switzerland to a point, and has really impacted the data privacy regulations between the US and EU, and I think it's pretty detrimental and a huge impact for businesses right now.
Jed, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, but there's been a complete abrogation from the U.S. federal government around doing anything around data privacy, either because they cannot or will not. That's left it to, as you correctly noted, the 50 states. There have been some states that are more aggressive. Obviously, California comes to mind for consumer data. And some states, I'm in the great state of Texas, and it's the Wild West here in many ways, and really everything in between. And because of this abrogation by the U.S. federal government, what I see is businesses gravitating towards a solution that will meet the requirements of GDPR, even if that law is not applicable inside the U.S. Is that something you're seeing? And is this transatlantic trade going to drive a level of data privacy in the United States far beyond what is required by U.S. law simply to comply with GDPR?
Looking at it from a technology point of view, which is usually where I come at it as a technologist, outside of the legal frameworks that can be used. If data is being transferred for everyday operations and is being processed, then you have to consider all of that data, right? And you have to consider it all as a risk. GDPR really dictates that you have to have processes in place to classify data, discover data, and to be able to delete it. But you also have to be able to hold it in a way that means that it can't be deleted. So there are technology considerations around how you do that. If you're using what's called an electronic communication service provider, Microsoft is one, Amazon is one. Let's just use an example where you have OneDrive for Business, and you're storing all of your data there, and you have information on your clients that you're shipping things to the US, or for the investment firm, portfolios that they're holding for large European clients in the US. Then you really have to think about how you're deploying your public cloud and the structure in which you're moving things around. The public cloud providers do offer an opportunity to hold data in different regional areas dependent on where that data needs to reside. And some businesses who didn't sign up to the EU-US Privacy Shield, they are mostly already considering that as a deployment methodology. But the real consideration that needs to be made is, what data do I have? Find it, make sure that you know where it is, make sure you've classified it, and then make sure that you have the processes in place to deal with it, and then consider which region it needs to sit in is the process. But these providers, or these electronic communication service providers that are holding data, we in the future as technologists, we all have to think about where that data now resides and where it should be to fulfill the processes that GDPR require. One of the big pieces of this is CRM and HR data. These companies that are transatlantic, they've bought into some CRM products that's probably hosted in public cloud. It's got HR data in there, and typically they're not restricting where that data lives for European employees. So all of that data gets replicated both sides of the transatlantic, or their data sitting in the US or both sides. You end up with a situation where you've got very, very sensitive data, that, even payment data around bank accounts, which is really, really serious. That's going to be one of the biggest focuses that has to be managed. And if we don't manage that as technologists, then we're not creating an environment that's going to meet GDPR regulation. And I would even say with legal agreements, and I trust lawyers mostly, yeah, absolutely. It's okay to go and argue it, right? There's always a chance you're going to lose. Just take that data and put it in the right region. There's no reason to take the risk. And ultimately, if you go to your legal team and say, "Look, we've got a technological solution to dealing with this that doesn't require any kind of legal requirements," they will opt for that, right? They're only there really for the last case scenario.
Could there be another approach, which is what I would call a business solution to a legal issue, but similar to Microsoft, where a company decides to go full GDPR compliant as a business differentiator so that they can more easily do business and hold themselves out as the company you can do business with literally on a worldwide basis?
So I think that's a great question. I think there's so many different angles on this. I'll stick to a few. I think there's going to be, the way that I see it, I think there's going to be a few things that are going to happen, both in the EU and the US. I think in the US in particular, California are leading the way. And if you go and review the consumer policies right now, they are working their way towards a GDPR style privacy law, which is very progressive, and and that's great. And I know that New York have started the process of looking into it as well, which means that I think you'll start to see that that it'll be easier to do business in these locations. once that happens, Tom, you would have seen recently Silicon Valley started to migrate to Texas, Dallas in particular. There's a lot of technology businesses starting to move their headquarters over to Texas because of the lower wages, taxes, all kinds of things, easier to do business. If the Texas doesn't catch up, you'll see those businesses moving back to California because all of a sudden it's easier to do global business with 28 countries in the state. And New York will benefit from it too. And this is, it's not just seen as progressive. And I know that, there's different views on this, but it's also seen, in my opinion, as quite smart from a business point of view and from an economic point of view that these states will take this on and move with it, because I do see that that's going to benefit. Now, then you've got the EU side, right? And the UK leaving the EU is a big deal. And it's unprecedented. We're all learning as we go. But the one thing that the UK has come out and said is it will mostly follow GDPR, but not all of it, which will actually convince some European-based businesses to move their headquarters from Europe into the UK to make it easier to do business with the US, right? So the question is, what comes first, right? Do we have the US now adopting privacy laws quicker to try and do business with the EU and make it easier to do business? Or do we see the UK all of a sudden become a very popular destination for businesses because of the less tight regulation around GDPR and data privacy laws? And then businesses in the US choosing to not be as strict with their data privacy laws, but do business with the UK instead? There's going to be some positioning here, and it's difficult to see which way it's going to go. It's a question of speed and response, and in some instances legal representation of what is possible. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see the way that it plays out. There will still be the question around how the impacts of not following it are going to be implemented and the penalties are going to be handed out, and what kind of enforcement the European government or businesses are able to enforce. But I would definitely say that businesses positioning themselves to follow GDPR so that they never put themselves in that position in the US until California really gets a grip and New York gets a grip of these GDPR-esque privacy laws, it's definitely going to be a differentiator. But in the meantime, I definitely think that there's a technology solution to this that solves the problem. And I think in the meantime, to avoid any kind of legal issues or anything like that, and I've spoken to a lot of businesses that are starting to consider doing this, is move European data into the EU, get rid of it out of the US. If you need to process it, use remote working tool sets so that you never take the data out of the EU. You're just seeing it and processing it. Those are really, the quick solutions to the problem. Becoming GDPR compliant took most UK businesses somewhere in the region of 18 months. So it's not an easy task, and there's a lot of things to consider around it, around the right to know where your data is and the right to deletion. It sounds really simple when you say it that way, but providing that as a solution is incredibly hard.
Well, Jed, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering if any of our listeners wanted more information on Linedata technology or any of the topics you've covered today. Where can they find out?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn under Jed Gardner. You'll see me working for Linedata on there. You can give me a call, 203-892-2515. Alternatively, go to the Linedata website, www.linedata.com, and under the services part of that website, you'll find our technology services.
Well, Jed, as we continue to evolve on not only this story, this technology, and this issue, both from the legal and business perspective, I hope that perhaps I could call upon you to come back and we could visit about where we might be at that point in time.
Absolutely. No problem, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of Life with GDPR. We're going to link to the quarterly compliance client alert that explores these topics in a little more in depth in our show notes, so check that out. Also, check out the quarterly website for a great number of resources around GDPR. Life with GDPR is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. During this corona health crisis, please be safe, and stay sanitary. We look forward to visiting with you again next week.